What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, I'm going to talk through Wildcard 28, so reasons you might want to use the chip, what you need to think about, and also the draft I've come up with as well. So if you enjoyed the video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already, and let's get into it. So I'm going to start with some general thoughts about wildcarding in Game Week 28, why you might want to use the chip this week, and also if you are going to use it, the things to think about when you're building your squad. So for the most part, reasons to wildcard in 28, you've got a bunch of injuries that have started to pile up and you just can't get through it with free transfers only. It might be a lack of double Game Week 28 players. So we know that Bournemouth have got Sheffield United at home and Luton at home, great double game week. For Luton, it's not quite so good. Palace away and Bournemouth away, but they do play in 29. And another reason to wildcard in 28 is because you've got a lack of players for blank Game Week 29. You can't get through it with free transfers only, and you need to activate a chip. But also, it might just be that some of your players have got bad fixtures. Take Man City players outside of Haaland. Maybe if you've got a defender, for example. Well, it's Liverpool away this week. I would say almost no chance of a clean sheet. Liverpool almost certainly going to score at home. Then it's a blank in 29. And in Game Week 30, it's Arsenal at home, so another tough fixture. And you might have a few players like that, a lack of double Game Week 28 players, plus a few injuries. That might be enough to wildcard. Obviously, if you have planned to not use a chip at this stage of the season and your team's looking good, that's quite simple, right? Just don't wildcard, don't free hit. But a lot of people are not in that position. In terms of whether you should free hit 29 instead of wildcarding this week to save the wildcard for later on, that is probably going to be mostly dictated by how your Game Week 28 team looks. Like for my team, for example, I'm fairly well set up for 2 transfers, so a -4, I can get to 4 double Game Week players, and I don't have many injuries, and I don't have a huge amount of players with bad fixtures, so I'm probably more likely to free hit in 29, but there is not a right or wrong decision there. I think if you are looking to bench boost later on, possibly in Game Week 37, which should be the biggest double game week of the season, it is probably safer to have the wildcard later to set up for that, but it is not necessarily the be-all and end-all. It might be that for your team, it's better to wildcard in 28, and if you do save the free hit, that can be useful later on, because if we get a double in 34 that has like Palace and Man United and Newcastle, the fixtures might be good enough to want some of those double game week players, but you might not want them around that game week, like outside of it, basically. So being able to free hit those players in 34 and just manage your team for that big double later on, you know, it could be more than viable. So I wouldn't panic if you have to use your wild card this week. I know a lot of people act as though once you do that, you'll be screwed for the rest of the season. I promise you that will not be the case. But hopefully you have got both of those chips. That will make it easier. If you don't, and you're wild carding this week, you've just got to sacrifice a few things along the way. You probably won't be able to go all in on the doubles and the blanks. When you're building your draft, obviously you have to consider how many Bournemouth and Luton players to have. I think it's a no-brainer to have 3 from each team. I appreciate not everyone will agree with that. That's fine. It's your team. You don't have to do that. But Bournemouth's double is great, and Luton playing 29. And so I think a triple up on both of those teams is pretty obvious. The only way you might not do that is if you're going to free hit in 29, because then you can just not have to worry about having Luton players for this week and next week. But personally, I would save the free hit for later on in the season. The reason is, if you free hit in 29, right, which I get why people are looking at it, because it means you don't have to carry some of those players from bad teams later on in the season. You have to start making a lot of decisions for future double game weeks without knowing exactly where they're going to land. And that might not be a problem, but I would rather have the free hit later on to bail me out. And I think you can make a good enough team this week that also gets through 29 without having to free hit. And then basically for the rest of the season, you're transferring players mostly around the bench boost. Not just that, but that's where that's where most of the priority transfers are going to go, right? So you'll essentially be transitioning from the blank in 29 to being able to bench boost in Game Week 37. So your Luton players are going to have to go eventually, and that's where most of your transfers are going to be. So I would probably save the free hit for 34, but I do think it could be viable to go in 29. You just basically, if you go in 29, you're getting more like Arsenal, Chelsea players and stuff like that you know will double later. You just don't know which week they will go in. But personally, I think free hit 34 is better, and that is how I've built the draft for this video. And with free hit 34, like if you've got that chip for later on, more to the point, you shouldn't get too caught out by future double game weeks. I know I keep making this point, right? Some people say we've got a lack of info right now, and I kind of disagree. We know exactly which teams are going to double later on in the season. The only thing we don't know is which weeks they're going to go into. And if you wildcard now, you shouldn't get too caught out later on in the season because you've got your free hit. The only couple of scenarios where things could go wrong is if there's not many. Well, the one scenario really is if there's not many double game weeks in 34, then the free hit's not going to be as powerful for that week. And you could pivot and use it in 37 instead. But then where do you use your bench boost if you've still got that left over? That's the one scenario where maybe things get a bit tricky. But if the FA Cup results go as everyone thinks, so Wolves, Chelsea, Liverpool and Man City all win, there will be doubles for Newcastle and Man United in 34, almost certainly. And I think that free hit could be quite nice. And I think that would be undervalued, right? Because a lot of people will think right now, Newcastle players, Man United players, I don't really want a double or triple up. But if you can do it almost risk-free on a free hit and not have to carry those players either side, I think that could be worthwhile. So if I was wildcarding this week, I would definitely save my free hit for later on in the season. Let's see what the draft looks like. So just a couple of things to mention with this draft. It's got 10.7 million in the bank, which you don't see that often in FPL, but that's because there's no Haaland and no Salah. Obviously, Salah's got injury concerns at the moment. We'll have to wait for an update from Klopp, but both Liverpool and Man City are playing against each other in 28, so difficult fixture for both players. They both blank in 29, and then Haaland has Arsenal in game week 30, which isn't an easy fixture either. So if there's ever a time in FPL outside of injuries that you're not going to own Haaland, this could be it. If you want to have him and free hit in 29, or if you just want to own him and sacrifice other positions in this squad, perfectly fine, right? It's your team, you should do what you want. But that is how I would set it up. I've also set it up in a way that you would have to take a -4 in game week 29 to get to 10 players. Now, of course, you could set this up in a different way so that you get to 10 players for free. You could even set it up in a way you get 10 players and be able to roll a transfer in game week 29, so you're more flexible afterwards. All perfectly viable ways to play it. This is just how I would set it up. I think maximizing 28 and getting players you know you're going to want in the future and then getting 11 players out in 29 is quite difficult with just the wild card. Obviously, you could do it with a free hit, but I think going with 10 players for a -4 for me is a worthy sacrifice. But again, set your team up exactly how you want it. I've gone for double Bournemouth defence and double Luton, which I appreciate when you say it out loud doesn't sound great, but obviously you need those Luton players for game week 29. And for Bournemouth, they've got a great double, as we know. I'm not going to go through that again. I also think, look, Solanke's a given, right? Everyone's going to own him this week. It's quite difficult to nail a really good Bournemouth midfielder. Like, I don't mind Tavernier. I'm just not sure he's someone that I would want later on. So that's why I've gone for Zabani and Kirkes. Obviously, Senesi went off injured after like 12 minutes in game week 27. Super unlucky if you owned him. It's a hamstring issue. It might not be that bad. We'll have to wait and see what the update is, you know, ahead of the game week 28 deadline. But it seems really unlikely that he would play both of those games. And so I just wouldn't take the risk. So Zabani has played every minute for Bournemouth this season. He's absolutely nailed on. He's not the most exciting defender. He's probably not going to go and get you an attack and return. But for 4.4 million, you know, that's safety for later on. I would want him in my team. And the reason that I would look to carry at least one Bournemouth player for later on is because of the fixtures down the line. So in game week 30, they've got Everton at home. In 31, it's Palace at home. And in 32, it's Luton away. So the fixtures are quite good. They may double in 34, but part of my plan would be to sell 2 Bournemouth players in game week 29. And the reason for that is, on this strategy, if I was wildcarding this week, I would have my free hit for 34. So I wouldn't need all my Bournemouth players, you know, right up until game week 34. I could start to get rid of them. So Zabani and Kirkes as well. So Kirkes is playing left back. I know he's not completely nailed on when everyone is fit because Lloyd Kelly can play there instead. But he's not been in the squads for Bournemouth recently. Just double check here when he last played. It was, where is he here? Yeah, he hasn't played since game week 25 and he's still red flagged with a hip injury, unknown return date. So again, I think it'd be really unlucky if Kirkes didn't play both games in game week 28. And I just think he's probably a little bit more attacking. Nothing special, right? This is not a Trippier or a Trent or someone like that. But I think I would go for him for 28 only. And even if Lloyd Kelly does come back, some Bournemouth fans have already said that he could play centre-back with Senesi out as well. So I would go for Kirkes and Zabani. And then for Luton, it's fairly obvious. You go for Doughty. He's the most attacking defender in that lineup. And that's who I would go with. And obviously, you then got him for 29. And it's Kaminsky in goal from Luton as well. So you've got both of those Luton players for Nottingham Forest at home in 29. And obviously, you've got them for the double this week. If you wanted to sacrifice one of those defenders and play your Arsenal defender instead, absolutely fine. Or if you want to go for a Ross Barkley or a Tavernier or someone like that, you can do that. But this is personally how I would set it up. And then in 29, I would sell Kirkes to Reguilon because, one, he's really attacking, right? And two, it's Burnley away for Brentford in game week 29, which is a pretty good fixture. And that obviously gets your numbers up in that blank game week as well. On the bench, the two defenders are Gabriel and Udogie. So Brentford at home, I appreciate your benching him for that. And to be honest, with Gabriel, the fixture in game week 30 is terrible, right? It's Man City away. I wouldn't want to play him. But then it's Luton at home in 31, Brighton away in 32, bit trickier. Villa at home in 33. You know, if we're looking at just the good fixtures only, like the one's good chance of a clean sheet. 36 is Bournemouth at home. Last day of the season is Everton at home. Obviously, we can reassess a lot closer to the time about the title race and stuff like that. But Arsenal will also have a double at some point as well. Gabriel is such a good value defender, looks to be nailed on now. And obviously goal threat is there. So I would want one Arsenal defender. And then Udogie's also in there with Aston Villa away this week. He's actually third on the bench. But obviously that's for the game in 29 against Fulham. And Spurs also have Luton at home in game week 30. So with this draft, I'd be selling Kirkes, but I'd be keeping Zabani because he's the one that's absolutely nailed. He's got Everton. I think it's Everton at home. And let me just double check that. I'm getting lost with the fixtures. Yeah. So you'd have Zabani against Everton at home in game week 30. Udogie against Luton at home. And then you're basically picking either Reguilon against Man United at home, which is probably where I would go. Doughty against Chelsea away. No, sorry. Doughty against Spurs away, or Gabriel against Man City away. So your defence in game week 30 would basically be Everton at home, Luton at home, and Man United at home, which is not that bad, especially considering what everyone else is going to have. For my own team, I might even have to play two Arsenal defenders, which is not great. So that looks pretty well set up. And then the goalkeeper I've gone for on the bench is Raya from Arsenal, because again, we know that Arsenal are going to have double game weeks down the line. That's basically what I would do with my goalkeepers. One of them, I would want a player that we know is going to double in 29. And I'm getting lost here. Going to double later on in the season. And how do we know they're going to double? Because they blank in game week 29. So you could go for Petrovic from Chelsea if you wanted to, if you think he's going to keep his place. I think he probably will. But Sanchez is always there to put a slight doubt in that. You could look at someone like Vicario, who plays in 29, and Spurs will double later on. But the problem is, if you go for him, you either got to drop Udogie or one of your Spurs attackers, and I'm just not sure I'm willing to do that. But there are definitely options, but I quite like Raya. And that just, because you probably are going to want triple Arsenal at some point, and that just saves having to bring an outfielder back in. You could, of course, go for Neto in goal from Bournemouth, and drop one of your outfield Bournemouth players. That's perfectly viable. But if you do that, your player on the bench then needs to play in 29. So someone like Areola would probably have to come in with Villa at home. Obviously, he's nice and cheap as well, but he won't double later on. Just to go through the different ramifications here, Neto is fine, right? Because the double this week is great. I'm sure he's going to rack up a good score. But if you're on the free hit 34 strategy, and that is where Neto doubles, then that's less useful for you than having someone like Raya for later on. A lot of it might come down to team value as well, because Raya's 5 million, and that might just be too much for you if you've got low team value. But just something to think about with goalkeepers. Either way, you need someone that's going to play in 29. For this draft, I've gone for Kaminsky. You could go for Areola, Vicario, or someone like that instead if you wanted to. So one of the reasons I've gone for double Bournemouth and double Luton defence is there's a lot of midfielders that I wanted to fit into the draft. And if I go for Tavernier or Barkley, they obviously take up one of the spots. So that's why I've set it up this way. I've got James Maddison on the bench with Aston Villa away. If you had to play him this week, or you wanted to play him this week, no issue with that whatsoever. He's a really good option. But I think I've got 4 better midfielders for game week 28. But Maddison still has value because it's Fulham away in 29, when obviously a lot of teams are blanking. Then it's Luton at home in game week 30, and I would play him in both of those games. And then the rough plan here is to be able to afford Salah in game week 30 in one transfer, and then Haaland in game week 31 for a -4, and that would involve downgrading Maddison. Now, you don't need to decide on which player you're going to bring in right now, but Wolves midfielders, possibly, if some of them are back fit, like Neto and Hwang and players like that. Maybe Garnacho, if you know that Man United are going to double in game week 37, you could go for him. There's options that you don't need to have locked in right now, but that would be the rough plan. You could set this team up so that there's more money in the bank so you can get Salah and Haaland for free. But personally, I'd rather leave it like this. One of the reasons is we don't know if Salah's going to be fit by game week 30. It's quite a way away. It's after the international break, so you would hope that he will be, but it's not a guarantee. But Liverpool have got 4 matches before that point, so hopefully we'll get plenty of updates from Klopp, and you'll know at that stage, whether you need to bring him in or not. And if he's not fit by then, you can just get Haaland in one move instead, and then just keep this midfield, because I think it holds up pretty well. And then you can start reacting to the double game week news that hopefully we'll get by the game week 30 deadline. If not, hopefully by game week 31. So Maddison on the bench. I've got Jarrod Bowen against Burnley at home this week, playing in the first 11. Obviously, he's got a fixture in 29 as well, which is another home game. Not an easy one, but it is at home to Aston Villa. And then he is probably the player that I would sell in game week 30 straight to Salah. The other 3 midfielders, Palmer, Newcastle at home this week. No game in 29, of course, but the fixtures are good from game week 30, and Chelsea will have at least 2 double game weeks. They've got the match to rearrange against Spurs and the one against Arsenal from game week 29. Not easy fixtures, but extra fixtures on top of their already good ones they have outside of that. So I think I ran through it last week. From game week 30, it's Burnley at home, Man United at home, Sheffield United away, Everton at home, Brighton away. They're all pretty good fixtures for an attacker. And obviously Palmer has been incredible value. So he would definitely be in. Son, I think that's a no-brainer. Nailed on penalties. Great goal threat. Aston Villa away this week. Game in 29. Luton at home in 30. You know that already. Maybe he gets sold later on. But I think on this strategy where you're free hitting in 34, you would probably just take him out that week and then have him for the fixtures afterwards. I've said a few times, just to quickly clarify this, that Spurs fixtures are pretty good for the rest of the season. But as a lot of people have pointed out to me, they do have Newcastle away in 33, Man City at home in 34, and Arsenal at home in 35. Now, that fixture against Man City may or may not be moved to a different game week. But let's just say things stay as they are, right? So Newcastle away, Man City at home, Arsenal at home, Liverpool away. I know it's not great on paper, but in 34, you're free hitting anyway, so you can get rid of that. And after the Liverpool game, it's Burnley at home, 37, Sheffield United away in 38, and they're going to have a double put in at some point as well, right? They've already got the Chelsea game to rearrange, and that fixture in 34 could need to be rearranged as well. So possibly 2 doubles for Spurs, and pretty good fixtures outside of that. And I mean, Son can score in those tougher fixtures as well. So I think he's a no-brainer, right? I think he could come into your team this week if you don't already own him and stay for the rest of the season. And then with Saka, look, I'm recording this before they play Sheffield United. If he gets injured, then of course you don't go for him. But otherwise, I just don't think I need to say too much more. He's been fantastic recently, and he's going to continue to be great for the rest of the season. The longer the title race stays open, the better for FPL, because those picks like Saka and Haaland, when you get him back in, will continue to play great minutes. But I think just Saka's excellent. Brentford at home in 28, and then after Man City in game week 30, pretty good fixtures again, right? Arsenal will have Luton at home in 31, Brighton away in 32, Villa at home in 33. They have got a double to come later on as well. And if Wolves get through the FA Cup next round, then this game in game week 34 could be moved as well. So Arsenal have got at least one double to come, and just good fixtures outside of that. And Saka is just great. So I don't see any reason to go for it and not go for him. So the rough move for me would be, sorry, just to come back to the FPL page, Bowen, you can go straight to Salah. Right, that's just that'll be a no-brainer. Like, I think Bowen's okay for the next 2, but you don't need to keep him long term. That gives you 5.5 million in the bank to upgrade one of your attackers, either Watkins or Solanke, to Haaland. Then you just downgrade Maddison to fund it. That's the rough plan that I've come up with. Obviously, if you're wildcarding this week, you're probably going to think about this a lot more than I have at this point in time. There might be better ways to set up, but I think one of the beauties of wildcarding into a double and then a blank is your fixtures are kind of dictated to you and the way you set your team up. There's not necessarily a huge amount to think about outside of possibly goalkeepers and what your future transfers are going to be. So it all comes down to whether you're comfortable taking a -4 in 29 and then another one in 31, and obviously already having pre-planned transfers. But you've kind of got to do that to be able to manage 28 and 29, right? So you can maybe get rid of the hits, but overall, I don't think you can go for Salah at this point. Definitely not. And I probably wouldn't go for Haaland either. And then up front, it's Morris who completes the triple up for Luton, Solanke who completes the triple up for Bournemouth, and Ollie Watkins who has Spurs at home this week, West Ham away in 29, and Wolves at home in game week 30. And a bit like Saka, I probably don't need to sit here and tell you why Watkins is a good option. We just know he is at this point. He's been incredible this season and will probably continue to be. For me, two of those picks on Wildcard 28 are absolute no-brainers. One is Ollie Watkins, the other one is Solanke. If Solanke's fit and available for 28, he's by far the best captain. You've got to have him in your team. The only one up for debate is really Morris. But to be honest, as I mentioned earlier, when you wildcard into a double and a blank, some of the players just pick themselves. And I think that's the case with Morris. Like if you were trying to get a different forward that plays in 29, you're not going to go for a Burnley one, not over Morris anyway. You could go for Tony, but for me, the Solanke to Tony move in 29 is fairly obvious. Like Awani is not any better, I would say. And by the way, if you go for Tony instead of Morris, rather than doing the Solanke to Tony transfer, you've then got Tony versus Arsenal away in game week 28, which is not ideal. Like Spurs forwards, you don't want Werner long term. Maybe as a punt on free hit 29, you could go there, but probably not. Muniz, not bad, right? He's a nice cheap option. In game week 28, it's Wolves away. So it's not terrible at all, but I'd rather have the player with a double this week. So to me, Morris is almost a no-brainer as well, but I could see why people would want to go elsewhere. So that's the front three. That's the whole team. Just in terms of the transfers, I've already mentioned in game week 30, I'd be looking at bringing in Salah for Bowen. In game week 29, it would be the Kirkes to Reguilon move, and also Solanke to Tony, right? So that's the move I would do as well. That would leave you, for me anyway, it would leave 4.3 million in the bank. That might be more or less depending on your team value. So your only real choice is who to sell for Haaland in game week 31, either Tony or potentially Ollie Watkins instead. Now, right now, as I said on Twitter over the weekend, I appreciate nobody wants to have a discussion about selling Ollie Watkins because he's the highest scoring player in the game. He continues to be ridiculous in terms of consistency. He's gone up a lot in price since people bought him, and the next three fixtures are good. I'm not saying you sell him right now, but in game week 31, it's Man City away, and in 33, it's Arsenal away. Villa do have good fixtures. Like, I would say on paper, like, you know, Brighton away is that good, Chelsea at home and Liverpool at home, but I don't think they're that bad for Villa, and they will probably continue to do well. They're pushing for top four, so, you know, there's going to be no rest or anything like that. It's more than reasonable to want to keep Ollie Watkins, but they won't double at any point this season. And so I think when they've got City away and Arsenal away, there's a conversation to be had about maybe selling him. But the beauty is, you don't have to do it, right? You could just sell Tony instead and then bring Haaland back in. And to fund that, I'd be selling Maddison to someone that's kind of 6.2 million or less. Obviously, by the time you get to make that move, potentially you've got a bit less money, so you just go for someone a little bit cheaper. But that's the rough plan of what I would do. Reguilon and Tony in for a -4 in game week 29. Salah in game week 30. Haaland in for a -4 in game week 31. And obviously by that point, you should have the double game week fixtures for 34. Once we've got those, we should know who's going to double in 37. You can make your choice on which cheap midfielder to go for. So like I said, that's the rough plan. At that point, you're then looking to kind of start setting up for your bench boost and getting rid of Luton players. And I know some people will be looking at it thinking, I don't want to be stuck with Luton players. But essentially, most weeks, Kaminsky, Doughty and Morris are going to be on your bench anyway. And you're going to be back to playing a 3-5-2. So, look, would I want to be stuck with Luton players from game week 30? In an ideal world, no. But for those people that have to use a chip in around game week 29, are stuck for players and just don't think a free hit will work because either their team's not good enough this week or it might not look good enough in the future, wildcard is more than reasonable. And if you're doing that for me, it makes sense to go triple Luton for the double and then to have them play in game week 29. You can absolutely set this up in a different way. It's your team. Play it however you want, but that's pretty much what I would do. Maybe with another week's worth of thinking, I might change something slightly. But realistically, you're only thinking about... I mean, if I look at this team and I have to say who would be nailed on, Solanke, Watkins, Morris, Saka, Son, Palmer, Gabriel, Udogie, probably Maddison as well. That's already 9 players. And really at that point, you're just changing which triple Bournemouth and Luton you have, and that will have a knock-on effect elsewhere. So if you go for, I don't know, let's say you go for Barkley instead of Bowen, then you've got to change over your goalkeeper. Or I don't think I would change Doughty, to be honest. Maybe you go for Neto in goal instead of Kaminsky. That means you get rid of one of your Bournemouth defenders. There's a domino effect, basically. So I would start with the players you know are going to be in the team 100%, and then just work out the rest. Essentially, just work backwards. Anyway, I'll leave that there. Let me know what you think about this draft. Tell me in the comments how much you hate it and how I've made a mistake and you would go for someone else instead. And to be honest, I'd genuinely be interested because I think there might be different ways you can set this up, and obviously everyone has their preferences. Give the video a like, hit that subscribe button, rate 5 stars if you're on podcast, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.